I'm Jack Berryman, ACSM historian, and we're talking this afternoon with Ann McTiernan as part of ACSM's Distinguished Leaders in Sports Medicine and Exercise Science video series. So thank you, Ann, for stopping and talking with us. I just wanted to first start out with congratulating you. You're going to get a citation award tonight.
Thank you. Yeah, it's really nice to be able to get that.
It's a good group of people every year.
It is, and American College of Sports Medicine historically didn't focus on cancer research, so it's really nice to know that they really think of this as important research now.
Yeah, and like Ken, there wasn't much on public health either.
Mm-hmm.
So in
That's
general.
Right. That's right.
So anyhow, I just wanted to start out with maybe if you could tell us a little bit about where you grew up, where you went to college, and your interests at the time, and then we'll work our way through.
Okay. Well, I grew up in Boston, working class section of Boston, and went first to a Catholic college and then graduated from Boston University. And majored in sociology, mostly because it was in the 70s and I didn't really know what I wanted to do.
Right. So this is BU now and not BC.
Right, Boston University.
Okay. And what time period have we
So that I graduated in 1974.
Okay. Okay. All right. A Soc major.
Yeah, exactly.
All right. And then what?
Well, it was the revolution back then, so.
Yeah, and you were in sociology.
Right, yeah. And then I was still interested in it after finishing college, so I did graduate studies. I did 2 years of sociology, graduate work in State University of New York in Buffalo.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah.
That's a good school.
Yeah, working on medical sociology, so getting a little closer to medicine then. Yeah.
Wow.
And then I got married and moved to Toronto and worked for an epidemiologist for a couple of years, and that got me really interested in epidemiology.
Good, yeah.
And then once my husband at the time was finishing his Ph.D., and so once he finished, then we looked for a place for both of us, and I wanted to do a Ph.D. program, so that's when we ended up in Seattle. So I entered the Ph.D. program.
In what?
In epidemiology.
Oh, okay. Yeah. So the sociology's gone at this point.
Yeah, but it's useful because it's
all people.
Well,
I don't mean you forgot about it.
It's all people. Yeah.
Yeah, sure. But so is that in public health or where?
It's in the School of Public Health.
Yeah,
that's right. Yeah.
Okay. So you did your Ph.D.
in epidemiology.
And when did you finish?
And so I finished that in 1982. So that was from 1978 to 1982.
Okay.
And I remember because we arrived in Seattle with a baby, and then at the end of my degree had a second baby. So the dates are easy to remember. My
wife and I moved to Seattle with a 6-week-old, so in '75. So yeah. Well, so then you do an MD somewhere along the way.
That's right. Well, I noticed in epidemiology that there was so much in medicine there, and I really felt like I was missing a lot of the knowledge that I wanted to have. And so I thought I'd do a medical degree, but I thought I would just stop with medicine. I didn't think about doing a residency.
Oh, yeah, 4 years and you're done, right?
Yeah,
but
then it turns out once you do medicine, you feel like you haven't finished. So that's why I ended up doing internal medicine afterwards.
Where did you do your MD degree?
But then we kind of flip-flopped back to the East Coast and I did medical school at New York Medical College in New York. It's in Valhalla, outside New York City.
Okay.
Yeah.
Wow. And your husband went back.
He went back. He took he took like a sabbatical. So it was like it was kind of like a 4-year sabbatical.
And you have children by this time.
That's right. Yeah, there were 7 and 3 when I started. Yeah.
I can appreciate this already.
Yeah.
So, all right. Yeah. And then so you.
And then after the 4 years,
then you did a residency.
Then we did the match program, and that ended up back in Seattle. Yeah. So I did the residency.
And where did you do that in Seattle?
At University of Washington. In internal medicine.
Okay. Yeah. And so, where along the way? Let me think. So, what did you do your research in epidemiology in?
It was primarily in cancer research, and
so that's excuse me. That's though when you sort of started looking into the cancers.
That's right. Well, a little bit when I was doing the sociology degree, because
Oh,
the person I worked with was a medical sociologist, and he was interested in cancer, and he
Okay.
did pretty much cancer epidemiology. And then when I worked in Toronto, that was also for a cancer epidemiologist. And,
Okay.
and Seattle University of Washington is pretty famous for cancer epidemiology,
Yeah.
so it was kind of pretty consistent that I ended up staying in cancer. And then when I finished my internal medicine degree, I looked into practice jobs, but they were just very difficult to do with a family. And so then I started looking more into research. And at Fred Hutchinson Cancer Research Center, there was a big study starting up about the time I was finished with in my residency called the Women's Health Initiative. And they were looking for a project director, so I applied for that. And so that's how I ended up staying in Seattle, staying at Fred Hutchinson, and that was my first job after residency.
What was that year? When
So
did
that was in
start?
1992.
Okay. And you were perfect for that. I mean, just think of it. They were probably thrilled to
in a way,
find.
but it would have been hard for anybody. It was a big trial. It was like the most complex trial ever done.
Yeah. Was
So
that NIH funded?
It was funded by NIH, right?
Yeah.
And involved 160,000 women in 40 clinics around the country, and it was very complicated. Yeah.
You knew what you were getting into, sort of.
I didn't know what I was getting into.
Wow, that's huge.
Yeah.
Where along the way did you intersect with the American College of Sports Medicine?
Well, I was working for Women's Health Initiative, but that was very much a service job. And at the Hutch, in order to progress and get promoted, you had to do your own research too. So I had a colleague there who had some data, a case control study in breast cancer, so where she'd interviewed a number of women with breast cancer and a number of women without, and then had a lot of data on them that we could use to compare the cases to the women without cancer. And in particular, the information on physical activity had not been analyzed. And just about that time, a couple of studies had come out suggesting that physical activity was associated with a lower risk of breast cancer. So we analyzed the data from that study and found that this was for women that were middle-aged women, younger to middle-aged women. And we found that exercise was associated with a lower risk of breast cancer.
Wow. That had to be one of the earliest.
It was one of the earliest.
connections.
It was one of the earliest. It was about in the mid-1990s.
Yeah.
And then what I was very interested in, so I'm a physician, I don't want to just know associations. I want to know, can you do things? Can you change something? Can you get somebody to change their level of physical activity and then change some biological marker that might be related to risk of breast cancer? And so then I started doing a series of clinical trials where you get people that are previously sedentary, get them to exercise, and see what kind of an effect you have on biomarkers of breast cancer.
Okay. Now, are any of these longitudinal too, or
Well, they're longitudinal in the sense that they're about a year long,
A year,
and which is pretty long for exercise trials. There are a lot of trials that have been done around the country over the years, and not that many that have lasted a year long.
I've seen your your recruitment things, I think, for the women for some of your research. So is that when you got interested in ACSM? When with that physical activity?
Yeah, it was around then, because it was a perfect place to be talking about physical activity and health effects. And so yeah, I can't remember the exact year I came to my first meeting, but it was back then.
Did you present some of your research then at ACSM?
I did, yeah. And then I had students too, or postdocs that presented as well. And I had a couple of postdocs that had done training in exercise physiology, and so they had close ties to ACSM as well from the undergraduate degrees or the graduate school degrees.
Okay.
And so then they presented here too.
All right. And what about, did you publish at all in MSSE?
Yeah, I've had several papers published in this journal. Yeah, because it's a great journal for publishing on physical activity effects on health. Yeah. And
then you've published undoubtedly in the cancer literature as well, so it's able to bridge.
Yeah, and in general medical journals too, because when we've done trials, there are only so many trials you can get funded to do, so we tend to look not just at cancer markers, but also at general health markers. So we've looked at quality of life effects of exercise, we've looked at menopausal symptoms from exercise, we've looked at cholesterol and insulin, and so there's a lot of different things you can look at that are relevant to women's overall health, and men too, because we did a study that involved women and men.
So going back to that early data you mentioned, and the physical activity part hadn't been analyzed, you've gone from there and you're pretty much studying physical activity as it relates to a lot of different issues now, right? Okay.
That's right, and then because I was in the Women's Health Initiative, once that study matured and there was enough data collected and women had been followed long enough, I was able to look at associations in that study as well. So we published in JAMA the associations of physical activity with breast cancer risk in the Women's Health Initiative postmenopausal women, and found similar results, that women who are physically active have a lower risk of breast cancer. And then what we've been seeing in both in those association studies and in our clinical trials, that it's not just physical activity that's important, but also weight control. So now we've kind of moved a little further along and branched into looking at what effects do you have if you control weight, get women to lose weight if they're overweight, what kind of additional effects can you have there?
Have you been exercise specific in any of your, in other words, is it just physical activity? I guess what I'm asking is, what are there different types of physical activity that seem to have a better effect than others?
Well, the observational studies have only looked at aerobic activity, like walking, biking.
Not necessarily strength.
They haven't looked at strength training, and because if you're looking at what the population does when you're looking at those types of studies, and people don't tend to do much in the way of strength training. So you're really looking at associations of aerobic activity, and in that age group it's primarily walking and risk of breast cancer. So then when we did our clinical trials, then we wanted to replicate that. So we got people, we gave them a goal of a little bit higher than the Surgeon General goals. So our goals were more like 45 minutes a day, 5 days a week. And we picked that because that seemed to be where you start seeing effect on breast cancer risk. And what's interesting is I'm starting to think of it as like an 80% rule. It's like whatever goal we gave our women, they met about 80% of the goal. So we had a couple of studies where we asked them to do 45 minutes a day, 5 days a week, so that's a total of 225 minutes, and on average they met about 80% of that. I had another study where we asked them to do an hour a day, 6 days a week, so that's 360 minutes, and they met 80% of that.
Wow.
And then I had a yoga trial where we're asking people to do yoga 5 days a week, an hour of that, and they did about 80% of that. And this is the women. The men, when we did a study with men, the men went higher. They had a higher
This
adherence.
sounds like a sociological study in the making here for you. What's going on? Do you think there's potential if you could do it somehow? I mean, I guess just in a general way, do you think strength could be, in fact, a factor?
Strength training?
Yeah.
I'm sure it could be, because some of the biomarkers that we're looking at that may be related to cancer risk for breast and other cancers are related to insulin resistance. And so as much as strength training can affect insulin resistance,
it would make sense.
Separate from aerobic activity, which it can, then it would make sense that that would be important. We've not done studies like that where we've teased out aerobic versus strength training.
Yeah, because it just seems to me that, I mean, physical activity in that relationship's obviously important, but I can see people wanting to know, okay, well, what do I do? Maybe I'm wrong, I don't know, but it just seems that would be the next question.
And we usually tell people, in terms of telling the public, we usually tell them the best exercise is one you're going to do. And then you're going to do consistently. And then we tell them they don't have to be athletes.
That's such good advice.
But you know, strength training is excellent. It's one of the Surgeon General recommendations now, or the Department of Health and Human Services recommendations, to do strength training a couple of times a week. It's just implementing that's very difficult.
Yeah.
Getting people to learn how to do that without having a trainer, without taking classes is
without
really
getting
challenging.
hurt or whatever.
It's really challenging, yeah. So that's
Yeah.
the sort of thing you got to start young, I think, or have available at medical facilities or whatever to have something available for people.
Yeah, or a place, or everybody just doesn't have a room full of weights or whatever. Everyone can walk.
The place and then somebody to teach them, and then that ends up being costly.
Yeah, I can see the issues there.
Yeah.
Yeah. So are you headed off into any new directions or any new things coming up, or what?
Well, I think I'm interested in looking at combinations of things. So we did a relatively large trial where we randomly assigned 439 women to 4 different study groups. One was an exercise program for a year, one was a weight loss program through diet, one was both diet and exercise, and one was control.
Oh.
And we're publishing on that and finding that the weight control really has the biggest effect, and the combination of...
Bigger than the combo.
No, the combo, I was just going to say, the combination is the biggest effect.
Yeah.
So really seeing that for women who are overweight or obese, that getting the weight down but making sure they're physically active is going to have the best benefit. And then we're doing a trial right now that's funded through Komen, which is we're using the same weight loss program with diet and exercise, and then randomly assigning women to vitamin D or not. In the Northwest, we have a lot of women that are deficient in vitamin D.
Yeah.
And there's some thinking that vitamin D may be associated, or vitamin D deficiency might be associated with cancer risk. It's associated with a lot of other diseases as well. And so we're randomly assigning women. It's a blind study. They don't know if they're on vitamin D or placebo. And then we're following them for a year and then looking at various effects on cancer risk factors.
Wow.
Yeah.
That sounds neat, too.
Yeah.
Yeah. You're really doing some exciting things.
Yeah, trying to do different things. And it's in this funding environment, it's very difficult to do any of these things, and it's going to get even harder, unfortunately.
Yeah. And sounds like you're attracting a lot of good postdocs and
the
things
postdocs,
like that.
I've had wonderful postdocs and students. Have been really lucky, yeah.
Do you ever, or do any undergrads ever get a chance to do much? Or do you
We've had a few undergraduates, not as many, but we've had some, and part of it is that they tend to have very busy schedules, and so it's difficult to get them in to have an extended research experience. We have a lot of them come in and do internships. And so we always have a couple of undergrads that are circulating around.
Yeah, that would be. Trying to think of the student that did some stuff with me that worked over there, and I'm not sure if she's just started med school at the UW. I thought her name was Daria Horn, or does that ring a bell?
I'm not sure.
She was so excited she was able to get involved in some research over at Fred Hutch, and I think it helped her really with her medical school application as well, you know. So back to ACSM, so I guess what I'm trying to get at is that when you think of places to present your latest research, I think what you said earlier is that because you're doing research in physical activity, ACSM is pretty much the top of the list for that interest group. Is that correct?
That's right. I would say so. They're going to be the most interested in physical activity. They're not looking for a drug, magic drug cure. They're looking for real physical activity results. And they're interested in biology. So I think it's been a really good place for postdoc students and for me and my colleagues to be presenting. Yeah, and so I've done those results, and then I've done quite a few overview talks over the years. And one year we did a symposium that I led on exercise, physical activity, and cancer. And every year there's something like that. There are quite a few sessions. And there's a special interest group now on
Oh, I didn't know
on
that.
physical activity and cancer. That's right.
Oh,
That's
wow.
been going on for quite a while now.
That's one I didn't
Yeah.
know about.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
Now, what other cancers has there been this connection?
Oh, there's
Sure.
quite a few.
Well,
Colon
there's a
cancer,
long
for
list.
example.
All right, I hadn't heard of that.
Yeah, people who are physically active have about half the risk of getting
Wow.
colon cancer of people who are not. And it's the most consistent risk factor for colon cancer compared to anything else, and even compared to diet or obesity. So physical activity or lack of physical activity is consistently associated. And then there are several other cancers that have been associated, and some of it is through effects on weight. So if somebody's physically active lifetime, then they tend to keep their weight under control, tend to not gain weight over
Right.
time, not as much, tend not to become obese.
Mm-hmm.
And so a lot of those obesity-related cancers they're getting protected from. And those are things like endometrial cancer, kidney cancer, lower esophageal cancer, even some of the cancers of the blood now we're seeing are associated with obesity. And as I mentioned, colon cancer and then
Yeah.
and breast cancer.
50% for colon
For
cancer?
colon, if somebody's physically active, they have half the risk of getting colon cancer compared to somebody who's
That's
inactive.
amazing.
And that could be partly because of insulin resistance, it could be because of the weight control, but it could just be mechanical. It could be that they're getting their gut moving, they're getting rid of all those toxins,
Yeah.
and then those toxins and carcinogens don't have a chance to sit around in the gut and cause the damage.
What's the percent for breast cancer?
Breast cancer tends to be a little bit more like 30 or 40% reduction in
Which is
risk.
still amazing.
It's still,
I mean,
yeah.
That's,
Yeah,
yeah, okay.
yeah.
Wow.
And then a lot of us are interested in cancer survivors. So what happens when somebody has a
Yes,
diagnosis of
yes.
cancer?
Yes.
Can exercise, physical activity have health benefits? Can it be helpful for quality of life? And so there's a lot of research going on in that area as well.
I've seen some of that, yeah. Now, but you're not doing that yourself.
No, I
right?
do some of that.
You
And one of
do?
the
Okay.
cohort studies that I'm collaborating in, we have one of the centers in Seattle for
Okay.
a cohort of breast cancer survivors.
That's where I had to have seen
And
it.
yeah, and so there are 1,180 women in that study that we've followed for 10 years now. And
Wow.
we've shown that women who are physically active have lower risk of dying of breast cancer. Now, it's not cause and effect. You don't know if it's just people that were
Yeah.
feeling better,
Yeah.
were physically active. But we can see that a lot of the biological factors that are associated with sedentary lifestyle tend to be associated with poor survival as well. So a lot of things like insulin resistance, inflammation, and some other things that may be related to poor lower levels of physical activity are predicting poor survival also.
You really have had have good luck, skill, whatever, with your groups, your ends. I mean, 1,400. Is that unusual or not?
It is for one study. Well, the cohort study is 3 centers. So we recruited women in Seattle and Los Angeles and New Mexico. So that's
Okay.
multi-center, multi-ethnic
Okay.
study. But the 439 in Seattle is a pretty good size.
It seems really big.
It is
to
pretty
me.
good size for one
Yeah.
center, and part of it's just the women in the Northwest, people in the Northwest are a little more interested, I think, in joining studies. And once they join it, they're very good. They tend to stick with it, so they're very adherent to whatever you're asking them to do. But these are all pale compared to the Women's Health Initiative, which had 160,000 women in the whole study around the country. And each center, including Seattle, was one of the centers for that. There were about 4,000 women in each center.
Gee.
So it was much bigger.
Yeah, yeah.